everyone, and welcome back to Anne's Family Recipe. It's football season, and today I'm making 3 delicious game day dips. Today's video is sponsored by the Pennsylvania Beef Council, and I am very excited to partner with them and bring you 3 delicious dip recipes that feature ground beef. My husband and I have 5 kids, so game days for us involve tailgating here at home. Everyone in my family enjoys snacking on chips and dip, and by incorporating ground beef, I'm boosting that nutrition factor by adding protein along with 10 essential nutrients, including B vitamins, zinc, and iron, which support a healthy lifestyle. Today, I'm making a classic taco dip, a cheesy sloppy joe dip, and an incredible Greek layer dip. Let's get started. First up, I'm making a classic taco dip. Now, something else I really like about working with ground beef is that it's a very budget-friendly option. So for my 3 recipes today, I'm using 1 package of ground beef and I'm dividing it up. So for this, I'm starting with about 3/4 of a pound of ground beef, and I'm gonna brown that in a large nonstick skillet over about medium-high heat. And then once that's cooked through, I'll drain off the excess grease. I wanted my dip to have a lot of flavor, so I ended up using an entire taco seasoning packet with my meat and then another one in my cream cheese and sour cream mixture. But you could just use 1 packet and divide it, half for the meat and half for the cream cheese, whatever sounds good to you. But here I added in that whole packet of taco seasoning and then about 2 tablespoons of water just to help it adhere to the meat and so it wasn't dry. For the base layer of my dip, I'm using a brick of softened cream cheese and a cup of sour cream. Now, if you don't like cream cheese, you could eliminate that and just double the amount of sour cream you use, but I wouldn't use that as your base. I would put the refried beans down first. But to season this mixture, I'm using, as I said before, a packet of taco seasoning, and then you just mix that together, and you really do want to make sure the cream cheese is soft so that it incorporates easily. And then I spread this mixture in the bottom of my glass pie dish. You could also use a square or rectangular glass baking dish as well. I like the glass because then you can see the layers inside. Another neat option is to get clear cups and make individual portions for each of your guests. The next layer is a can of fat-free refried beans, and I just mixed those up in a bowl for a second so they were a little bit easier to spread out. The next layer is my seasoned ground beef, so I sprinkled that evenly all over the top. And then these last few ingredients, all of the toppings don't really have specific measurements. You can just add as much or as little as you'd like. So I'm starting with a Mexican blend of shredded cheese. This didn't have any seasonings in it, but it did have a few different kinds of cheese incorporated. And then I chopped up some black olives and a tomato. And with the tomato, I did remove the seeds and some of that extra juiciness in the middle so that it wouldn't make my dip wet. But then I diced that up into small little bite-sized pieces. On top of the cheese layer, I sprinkled some shredded lettuce and then the diced tomatoes and olives, and my taco dip was ready to go. So you want to refrigerate this until you serve it, but I would recommend pulling it out of the fridge maybe 20 to 30 minutes before you do, because the cream cheese can kind of firm up when it's cold and you want it to be a little more dippable. I ended up just using a spoon so it was easier to get all of the ingredients onto my chip. This has great flavor, and I love the addition of the ground beef layer. It's sort of a loaded taco dip. It makes it really hearty and extra delicious. Next up, I'm making sloppy joe dip, which is kind of trendy right now, and I really wanted to try this out. So again, I'm starting with about 3/4 of a pound of ground beef that I'm browning in my skillet, and the USDA does recommend that you cook ground beef to an internal temperature of 160 degrees. Now for this dip, I am not draining the grease because you need that to help the flour adhere to the beef. So you sprinkle in 1 tablespoon of flour and then toss it around to coat the beef. For seasoning, I added half a teaspoon of garlic powder, half a teaspoon of onion powder, and half a teaspoon of salt, plus about a quarter teaspoon of black pepper. I also added 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. I stirred everything together to coat the meat in the seasonings, and then you want to let this continue cooking just for a minute or two to help that brown sugar start to caramelize on the beef. For the sauce, I used 1 8-ounce can of tomato sauce and a half a cup of ketchup, along with a teaspoon of yellow mustard, and then a tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce and a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar. And then for a little additional liquid, I added in half a cup of beef broth. And I stirred this all together and brought it to a simmer, and then I reduced the heat to about medium-low and allowed this to simmer for about 10 minutes, stirring it occasionally until it thickened up. And that's why you added the flour earlier, because that's going to help bring this dip together a little bit. I transferred my dip to a glass baking dish, and then I topped it with about a half a cup of shredded cheddar cheese and gently stirred that into the mixture. And then I added an additional quarter cup or so of shredded cheese on top. This baked in the oven at 375 degrees for about 15 minutes. You want the cheese to totally melt, and the whole dip is going to get nice and bubbly around the edges. I served this dip with corn chips, which was a perfect pairing, and this was kind of the surprise hit for me. I really enjoyed this. It's a little bit of a change up to a classic chili dip you might find at a party, and it's warm and cozy and just has great flavor. My Greek layered dip is a showstopper. It is beautiful and packed with flavor. Today I'm going to make my own tzatziki sauce, which is a Greek yogurt sauce with cucumbers in it, and also make my own hummus. But you could easily buy both of those dips at the grocery store, and that would make this incredibly simple and fast to put together. For my yogurt sauce, I'm shredding up half of a seedless cucumber, and then I'm going to take the other half and dice it up finely, and I'll use that as a topping a little later on. I placed the shredded cucumber inside a couple of paper towels and gently squeezed out some of the excess water, because otherwise your yogurt dip will get a little bit soupy and you want it to be nice and thick and creamy. To a medium-sized mixing bowl, I added in a cup of Greek yogurt, the shredded cucumber, the juice of a lemon, and 1 clove of minced garlic. And then I seasoned this with a half a teaspoon of salt and stirred it all together. You can refrigerate this for a little bit to allow the flavors to marry together, and also just to keep it cool until you're ready to use it. Next up, I'm browning the ground beef in a skillet, and I will be draining off the grease for this recipe. And don't forget, always be sure to wash your hands before and after handling raw beef. To season the ground beef, I'm adding in 1 tablespoon of my favorite Greek seasoning. I mixed this in and then set the cooked beef aside to cool. Next, I diced up some more toppings for the dip. So that started with a handful of grape tomatoes. You could use any kind of tomato, that's fine. And then also a handful of Kalamata olives. Just make sure you buy ones that are pitted. They're Greek olives and they have a really nice salty bite. So now I'm going to put together my homemade hummus. I love this recipe. You could definitely do store-bought hummus, but I wanted to share with you today how I make mine. And I'm making a lot because I wanted to have some leftovers too. I used 2 cans of chickpeas, also known as garbanzo beans. I drained them and rinsed them in cool water, and then I added those to my food processor. On top of that, I added the juice of 2 lemons and a half a cup of tahini, which is a sesame paste. If you get a new jar of that, you just want to stir it around so that the oils that separate on top get combined back into the paste. For seasoning, I added in half a teaspoon of salt and half a teaspoon of cumin, and then I also used 2 cloves of garlic that I roughly chopped, and I started out with 2 tablespoons of olive oil. Then I put the lid on and started pulsing this together, and then I removed the little cap in the middle of the lid, and I streamed in about 1/3 cup of water, and then kind of assessed where I was with the consistency, and I definitely wanted it to be a little bit smoother. So I added in another 2 tablespoons of olive oil, plus another 1/3 cup of water. And you can kind of eyeball this and make it to the exact consistency that you like. The fun part here is assembling this dip. I had seen a picture of a Greek layered dip online where they used a large platter, and I wanted to try that for presentation. So I started by smearing some hummus along the bottom in sort of a thin, even layer. And then on top of that, I put my tzatziki sauce, but I left a little bit of a perimeter of the hummus so you could see that underneath. Next, I sprinkled on the ground beef, and I didn't end up using all of my ingredients, but that was just because of the limitations of my size of platter. If you used a larger platter or a glass baking dish, you'd be able to use up all these ingredients. Then for the toppings, I scattered the diced cucumbers, tomatoes, and olives all over top, and for a finishing touch, I crumbled some feta cheese over top, which is another salty and also creamy addition to this dip. Other tasty topping ideas would be some pine nuts for a little crunch. Also, some roasted red peppers would be great here too. And I found these pita chips at my grocery store for serving. You could also use pita bread, cut it into little wedges and toast it up. This dip was fabulous. Thank you so much to the Pennsylvania Beef Council for sponsoring today's video. You can visit pabeef.org for your all things beef resource. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. You can follow me over on Instagram at Anne's Family Recipe and give this video a thumbs up if you love beef. Thank you so much for joining me here in my kitchen, and I'll see you again soon.